The morning Clara Whitmore was sent away, the sky was painfully clear, wide and empty, like it had nothing to say to her. At 28, she stood at the edge of a grand estate that had never truly been hers, her gloved hands wrapped tightly around the handle of a modest suitcase. The house behind her gleamed in quiet perfection, polished windows, white columns, everything in its place. Everything except her. "You've been very helpful, Miss Whitmore," the lady of the house said, her tone polite but distant, as though she were dismissing a servant rather than a woman who had lived under her roof for months. "But we believe it's best if we part ways now." Clara nodded. She had learned long ago how to accept things without asking why. No accusations were spoken aloud, but they hung in the air all the same. She wasn't lively enough, not charming enough, not pretty enough to be kept in a world where women were measured in smiles and soft features. A passing maid avoided her eyes. A footman carried her suitcase down the steps, as if eager to be rid of it. And her. "Thank you for your time," Clara said quietly, her voice steady despite the weight pressing against her chest. The lady offered a thin smile. "Of course. I'm sure you'll find something suitable." Something suitable. Clara stepped away before the words could sink any deeper. No one followed her. The wagon heading west was already half full when she arrived. Dust clung to everything, the wheels, the wooden benches, the tired faces of those climbing aboard. No one asked where she came from. No one cared. IT suited her. Clara took a seat near the back, setting her suitcase carefully beside her. The driver called out. The horses lurched forward, and just like that, the life she had briefly touched disappeared behind her in a cloud of dust. She didn't look back. There was nothing to look back at. The road stretched endlessly ahead, dry and uncertain. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the creak of wheels and the occasional murmur of strangers. A child began to cough, a weak, persistent sound that cut through the stillness. Clara glanced over. A young mother sat beside the boy, worry etched across her face. Without hesitation, Clara reached into her bag and pulled out a small cloth. "May I?" she asked gently. The mother hesitated, then nodded. Clara dampened the cloth with what little water she had and pressed it to the boy's forehead, her touch careful, practiced. She spoke softly to him, not words meant to impress, but words meant to soothe. The boy's breathing steadied. The mother whispered her thanks. Clara only smiled faintly and returned to her seat. No one else seemed to notice. By the second day, the heat had become relentless. Dust coated Clara's throat, her skin, her thoughts. Still, she endured it without complaint. She helped an elderly man adjust his seat when the road grew rough. She steadied a crate when it nearly toppled. Small things, quiet things, invisible things. It was how she had always existed, useful but never seen. They stopped near a narrow trail one afternoon, the wagon jolting to a halt with a sharp crack. One of the wheels had splintered. Groans rippled through the passengers. The driver cursed under his breath. And then, without fanfare, a man stepped forward. Clara noticed him immediately. Not because he demanded attention, but because he didn't. He moved with quiet certainty, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat casting a shadow over eyes that missed nothing. His hands were rough, steady as he examined the damage. A cowboy, clearly. The kind who belonged to this land in a way others only pass through. "Well, won't hold," someone muttered. "It will," the man replied simply. No argument, no raised voice, just certainty. Clara found herself watching as he worked, efficient, calm, unbothered by the growing impatience around him. Within minutes, he had reinforced the wheel enough to carry them forward. "Much obliged," the driver said. The man gave a small nod and stepped back, as if the moment had nothing to do with him. That was the first time Clara saw Ethan Cole. The journey continued, but something had shifted. Clara noticed him now, how he stayed slightly apart, how others spoke to him with respect, but never familiarity. He didn't seek conversation, didn't offer more words than necessary. Yet once, when the wagon hit a particularly rough patch, his gaze flickered toward her, just briefly. Not judgmental, observing. It unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. By the time they reached the next settlement, Clara's small amount of money was nearly gone. The town wasn't much, just a scattering of buildings under a harsh sun. People moved with purpose, with ownership. Clara felt none of it. She stepped down from the wagon, clutching her suitcase once more. End of the line, the driver called. Just like that. No destination, no plan. Around her, people reunited with family or hurried toward work waiting for them. Clara stood still, as if the ground beneath her hadn't decided whether to keep her. A pair of women passed nearby, their voices low but not low enough. "Poor thing," one said. "Plain as dust. Won't last long out here," the other replied. Clara lowered her gaze. The words shouldn't have hurt, but they did, because they were familiar, because they were always the same. "Got somewhere to go." The voice came from behind her. Clara turned. Ethan Cole stood a few steps away, his posture relaxed, his expression unreadable beneath the brim of his hat. She hesitated. "No," she admitted. He studied her for a moment. Not her face, not her clothes, but something deeper, as if measuring what couldn't be seen. "There's work," he said finally. "At my place." Clara blinked, caught off guard. "Work? Ranch work. Honest. Hard." There was no softness in his offer. No pity. Just truth. "Why?" she asked before she could stop herself. It wasn't suspicion, it was confusion. No one offered her anything without reason. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "I've had fancy," he said, his voice calm, steady. "It don't last." A pause. Then, quieter, but firmer. "I want real." The words settled between them, heavier than anything else spoken that day. Clara felt something shift inside her. Not hope, not yet, but something close to it. Something fragile. She looked down at her worn gloves, her dust-covered dress, everything that had made her easy to dismiss. "Are you sure?" she asked softly. Ethan gave a small nod. "That's the only thing I'm sure about." The ride to his ranch was quiet. The land stretched wide and untamed, the kind of place that didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. Clara sat beside him, her hands folded in her lap, her thoughts uncertain. She didn't know this man. She didn't know what waited ahead. But for the first time in a long while, she wasn't being sent away. She was being asked to stay. And as the sun dipped low on the horizon, painting the sky in soft gold, Clara Whitmore allowed herself the smallest, most dangerous thought of all. Maybe this time would be different. The ranch wasn't what Clara expected. It wasn't grand. It wasn't even particularly welcoming at first glance. A small, weathered house stood against the open land, its wood faded by years of sun and wind. A barn leaned slightly to one side, stubbornly holding its ground. Fences stretched across the property, some strong, some clearly in need of repair. But it was honest. That was the first word that came to Clara's mind as she stepped down from the horse. Nothing here pretended to be more than it was. Ethan tied the reins without a word and gestured toward the house. "You'll have a room inside. No ceremony. No hosetashchen." Clara nodded, clutching her suitcase as she followed him. Inside, the house was simple but clean, neatly arranged in a way that spoke of routine rather than comfort. A table, 2 chairs, a small stove, shelves, lined with essentials. No decorations. No souvenirs. A life built for one. "You work, you stay," Ethan said, setting his hat on a hook. "Fair trade." "Understand," Clara replied quietly. He glanced at her once, as if confirming something, then added, "We start early." And just like that, her new life began. The first few days were the hardest. Clara woke before sunrise, the chill of dawn cutting through her thin layers as she learned the rhythm of the ranch. There was always something to be done. Water to haul, meals to prepare, tools to organize, animals to tend. The work was unfamiliar, demanding. But Clara did not complain. She observed. She adapted. By the end of the first week, the kitchen was more efficient, supplies better arranged, and meals, though simple, carried a warmth that hadn't been there before. She repaired small tears in cloth, reinforced weak hinges, even suggested a better way to store feed to keep it from spoiling. She didn't announce these changes. She simply made them. And Ethan noticed he didn't say much, but his eyes lingered longer now, on the way she moved with quiet purpose, on how she anticipated needs before they were spoken. She wasn't just working. She was improving everything she touched. Evenings were the strangest part. At first, they sat in silence at the small wooden table, the only sounds the clink of utensils and the crackle of the stove. Clara kept her gaze low, unsure if conversation was expected. But slowly something shifted. One evening, Ethan spoke first. "You've done this kind of work before?" Clara shook her head. "No." He frowned slightly. "Could have fooled me." She hesitated, then said, "I've always learned quickly." That earned the faintest hint of a smile from him. So brief, she almost thought she imagined it. After that, words came easier. Not many, but enough. Days turned into weeks, and the ranch began to feel different. Softer, not because the land had changed, but because Clara had. A small cloth appeared on the table. The meals became more balanced. The house, once purely functional, now carried traces of care. And Ethan, though he would never admit it aloud, found himself noticing the absence of those things whenever Clara stepped outside. The first time they went into town together, the illusion of peace cracked. Clara felt it immediately. The shift in the air as people looked at her, then looked again. Judgment didn't need words. But words came anyway. "She's the one staying out at Cole's place, ain't she?" Strange choice. Not much to look at. Clara kept her eyes forward, her hands tightening slightly around the small basket she carried. It shouldn't matter. It never stopped mattering. Inside the general store, the shopkeeper greeted Ethan with respect, but his gaze lingered on Clara with thinly veiled curiosity. Ethan placed their items on the counter, unmoved. "She with you?" the man asked. Ethan didn't hesitate. "Yeah. No explanation. No apology. Just certainty." Clara felt something stir in her chest. Unexpected, unfamiliar. But the whispers followed them outside. By the time they returned to the ranch, the silence between them had changed. It wasn't empty. It was heavy. That night, Clara stood by the window of her small room, staring out at the dark stretch of land. She had felt this before, the quiet before being asked to leave. Her hands folded tightly together. Why had he chosen her? The question had been growing day by day, until it became impossible to ignore. She wasn't what men wanted. She knew that. So what made him different? Or worse, what if he wasn't? Ethan noticed the change the next morning. Clara was still working, still efficient, but something had withdrawn. A distance. He found it unsettling, more than he expected. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the horizon in fading gold, he spoke. "You're quieter than usual." Clara paused, her back to him as she wiped. Down the table. "I'm always quiet," she replied. "Not like this." The room stilled. She turned slowly, her expression calm, but her eyes held something deeper. "Why did you bring me here?" she asked. The question hung between them. Ethan leaned back slightly, studying her. "I told you that you wanted real," she said. "But that doesn't explain why me." Her voice didn't shake, but the vulnerability beneath, it was impossible to miss. Ethan exhaled slowly, as if searching for words he wasn't used to saying. "I've spent years chasing things that looked right," he said. "People who knew how to smile, how to say the right things." He paused, his jaw tightening slightly. None of it meant anything when it mattered. Clara said nothing. "I saw you on that wagon," he continued, "helping people who didn't even look at you twice." His gaze met hers fully now. "You didn't do it to be seen." A quiet moment passed. "That's rare," he finished. Clara's chest tightened. No one had ever described her like that before. Not in a way that felt valuable. For a moment, it felt like something fragile might finally settle between them. But fear is a stubborn thing. "And when you're done?" Clara asked softly. Ethan frowned. "Done with what?" "With this," she said, gesturing faintly around her. "With me." The words were simple, but they carried years of expectation. Ethan straightened, something sharper entering his expression. "That's not how I work." Clara looked away. "It's how everyone works." Silence followed. Not cold, but tense. Because neither of them knew how to bridge the distance between what had been and what could be in the days that followed. The rhythm of the ranch continued, but something underneath it had shifted again. Ethan found himself watching Clara more closely, not just what she did, but how she moved, how she seemed to carry a quiet readiness to leave. And Clara, she began to prepare herself, not outwardly, but inside. She told herself not to get comfortable, not to believe in something that had never lasted before, because sooner or later, people always chose something better. One evening, as the wind picked up across the plains and the sky darkened with the promise of a coming storm, Clara stood alone outside, staring at the horizon. Ethan stepped beside her. "You ever think about staying?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. Then, quietly, "I think about leaving before I'm asked to." The words struck harder than anything else she had said. Ethan turned toward her, his expression unreadable, but something in his eyes had changed. Something deeper, more certain, but he didn't speak. Not yet. And as the first distant rumble of thunder rolled across the land, one truth settled quietly between them. They were running out of time to say what mattered. Before silence made the choice for them, the storm arrived just before dawn. Wind howled across the plains, rattling the walls of the house and bending the land to its will. Rain struck hard against the roof, relentless, unforgiving, like something long held back finally breaking free. Clara lay awake in her small room, staring at the ceiling. She had already made her decision. By the time the storm passed, she would be gone. Not because she wanted to leave, but because she refused to be sent away again. She rose quietly, careful not to make a sound. The house was still, wrapped in the low groan of the storm outside. She packed what little she had brought with her, folding each piece with deliberate care, as though slowing the moment might somehow soften it. It didn't. Her hands trembled once. Only once. Then she steadied them. By the time the first faint light crept into the sky, Clara Whitmore stood at the doorway with her suitcase in hand. It was almost the same as before. Almost. But this time, she wasn't waiting to be dismissed. She was leaving on her own terms. The door creaked softly as she opened it. The storm had weakened, leaving behind a cold, heavy silence. The ground was damp, the air sharp. Clara stepped outside. "You leaving?" The voice stopped her instantly. Ethan stood a few steps away, his hat pulled low, his shirt damp from the rain. He must have been awake for hours, working, checking the ranch, making sure everything held together. Just like always. Clara didn't turn around right away. "Yes," she said. A single word. Simple. Final. Ethan took a step closer. "Why?" The question wasn't angry. It was something else. Something tighter. Clara closed her eyes briefly, then faced him. "Because this is how it goes," she said quietly. "It always does." Ethan's jaw shifted. "Not here." She almost smiled at that. "Almost." "You don't know that," she replied. "And neither do I." The wind stirred faintly between them, carrying the last breath of the storm. "I won't wait for it to happen again," she continued, her voice steady despite the weight behind it. "I won't stay until I become something you regret choosing." Something flickered in Ethan's eyes then, sharp, immediate. "Regret?" he repeated. Clara tightened her grip on the suitcase. "I've seen how this ends," she said. "Maybe not with you, but it ends the same way every time." Her voice softened just slightly. "I'm not what people keep, Ethan." The words hung there. Heavy. Final. For a moment, Ethan said nothing. And in that silence, Clara felt it. That familiar feeling of being right. Of being proven right. She turned, ready to walk away. "Clara." His voice stopped her again. This time, there was no distance in it. She turned back slowly. Ethan stepped forward, closing the space between them in 2 steady strides. "You don't get to decide that for me," he said. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried something unshakable. Clara blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "You don't get to decide what I regret. Or what I choose," he continued, his gaze locked onto hers. "That's mine." Her breath caught slightly. "I'm trying to save myself," she said. "And I'm trying to stop you from making the wrong choice," he replied. The air between them tightened. Not with anger, with truth, wroth and unguarded. "I told you already," Ethan said, his voice quieter now, but stronger than before. "I've had fancy." His eyes didn't leave hers. "I've had easy. I've had things that looked right to everyone else." He shook his head once. None of it meant a damn thing when it mattered. Clara's defenses wavered just slightly. You think I brought you here because I didn't have other options? He continued. Because you were convenient? She didn't answer, but the question hit its mark. I brought you here because I saw something real, he said. A step closer. Something steady. Something honest. Another step, and I don't walk away from that. Clara's chest tightened, her thoughts scrambling against the weight of his words. You don't know me, she whispered. Ethan stopped just in front of her. I know enough. Silence stretched between them. Then quieter, almost rough. I know what this place feels like when you're not in it. That was the moment something broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deeply. I can't do this again, Clara said, her voice finally cracking. I can't stay somewhere believing I matter, only to find out I don't. Ethan didn't hesitate this time. You matter. The words came fast. Certain, not a reassurance. A fact. To me, he added. Clara shook her head, tears blurring her vision. That's not enough if it changes. It won't. You don't know that. You don't. The force of his voice startled her into silence. Ethan exhaled slowly, grounding himself before speaking again. I know because this isn't about what you look like, he said. It's not about what anyone else sees. His voice dropped, softer, but more intense. It's about what stays when everything else falls apart. The wind shifted around them, carrying the last remnants of the storm into the distance. And then he said it, not rushed, not uncertain, but like something that had been waiting too long to be spoken. I don't want fancy, Ethan said. I don't want perfect. I don't want something that fades the moment it's tested. His eyes held hers completely. I want real, a breath. And you're the realest thing I've ever known. Clara's grip on the suitcase loosened, then slipped entirely. It hit the ground with a soft, final thud. For the first time in her life, the voice in her head, the one that told her she wasn't enough, went quiet. Not gone, but quieter than his. You're not staying because you have nowhere else to go, Ethan said, his voice gentler now. You stay because you choose to. Clara searched his face. For doubt, for hesitation, for anything that might prove him wrong. She found none. Only certainty. Only truth. Slowly, carefully she nodded. Not out of desperation. Not out of fear. But out of something new. Something stronger. Choice. Weeks later, the ranch stood the same as it always had. Weathered. Unpolished. Real. But inside, something had changed. Clara moved through the space with quiet confidence now. Not as someone passing through, but as someone who belonged. Her presence was no longer careful or uncertain. It was steady, certain. And Ethan, he didn't watch her from a distance anymore. He stood beside her. In town, the whispers hadn't disappeared, but they had lost their power, because Clara no longer carried them. When people looked at her now, they saw something different. Not because she had changed her appearance, but because she had stopped trying to. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the open land, Clara stood outside the house, her gaze stretching across the horizon. Ethan stepped beside her. No words were needed. Not anymore. After a moment, he spoke anyway. You ever think about leaving? Clara glanced at him, a quiet smile touching her lips. No, she said. Simple. Certain. The wind moved gently across the plains, no longer harsh, just present. Like everything else that mattered. And for the first time in her life, Clara Whitmore wasn't standing at the edge of something she was about to lose. She was standing in something she had finally found. A place where she wasn't overlooked, wasn't measured, wasn't dismissed, but chosen, exactly as she was.